Today's class was scheduled to be about L'David Oiri, about the minhag of reciting L'David Oiri in the month of Elul. However, I'm not yet completely ready to present on it, at least not to the extent that I would like to be. It's a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of history and controversy and fascinating stuff. With Hashem's help, I hope to be ready to do that next Sunday.
I've always liked that, because it's like we feed our enemy.
Right.
You're reading it. Don't put up with them.
Huh?
Don't put up with your enemies. We'll just go after them, right? I mean,
Take them captive.
Yeah, whatever it is, but it's.
So today I want to discuss another interesting halachic topic, which we mentioned for those who were here yesterday. We mentioned it briefly in the Parsha questions, but the truth is it's a fascinating topic, and there's a lot to unpack. So we're going to start from reading a passage from the book, the Sefer Saras Eliyahu. Saras Eliyahu is a small book, published for the first time in the year 1877 by Rabbi Avraham, the son of the Vilna Gaon, and this was a book which he published about his father, with different teachings from his father from the Vilna Gaon. In this book, he writes like this. In Parshas Kiseitze, the second passage of the Parsha says, if a man has two wives and they give birth to him, and they give birth to children, Hahuva, the loved one, V'hasnua, and the hated one. But the firstborn son is to the hated one. So then, he does not have the right to render the son of his preferred wife the bechor. The firstbornhood must go to the one who's actually the firstborn, because he is the beginning of his strength, his first strength. Writes over here in this sefer, the son of the Vilna Gaon. I'm going to share a story. Something that happened in the lifetime of my father. There was one man, he married a woman, and he hated her. So what do you do when you hate your wife? He divorced her. Just a few weeks after the wedding. Immediately he married another woman. It doesn't say here in the story if perhaps the reason he didn't like his wife was because he had his intention on this other woman, be that as it may. No less than 7 months had passed from his second wedding, and his new wife gives birth to a son. Subsequently it became known that in just a few days later, his ex-wife also gave birth to a son, to a male child, because it was now 9 months after their short marriage. After a lot of time, a dispute emerged between the family of the woman who was divorced and the man who divorced her. Which of those two sons should be the bechor to get the firstborn, to get the double lot of this person's inheritance?
Who was born first?
So the son of his current beloved wife was born first, but the son of his former hated ex-wife was conceived first. When the Vilna Gaon heard this story, that this story was the halacha for this case is alluded to for us in the Torah. The truth is that if you look at this passage in the Torah, there are numerous questions which can all be resolved by this one twist. First of all, it says, the pasuk says first, it says, they give birth to children for him, the ahuva, the loved one, v'hasnua, and the hated one. So first the loved one, and then the hated one. So it implies that the loved one is the bechor, the son of the loved one. But then the Torah immediately continues and says that the firstborn is the son of the hated wife. So why does it say that first that the loved wife gave birth? Secondly, what does it mean that the Torah says that the father doesn't have the capacity to render the son of the ahuva the bechor? Why would you think that he does have that capacity? that the Torah has to go out of its way to tell you that it doesn't. Number 3, why is we talking about a man hating his wife? You're not allowed to hate people, right? And number 4, why does the Torah say why does the Torah give us the reason for the mitzvah? The Torah doesn't usually give us the reason for this mitzvahs. Elavade says the Gra rather everything is alluded to in the Torah. Our story, the reason why this woman is referred to as the hated wife is because she's divorced, right? That makes sense. If that is the recipe, that if a person hates his wife, he should divorce her. And the second wife is called the Ahuva because he loves her. He's the second wife, and that's why he wants to render the son of the loved wife the Bechor, because he doesn't want to have anything to do. He loves his second wife. He loves this child. He doesn't like the first one. And therefore, just a moment. And therefore, he wants to give the second son, the son of the second wife, the double portion of the inheritance. Why? And why does he think he might have the capacity to do so? Because this child was born first. So he should be the first one. Says the Torah, no, you cannot render the one who was born first the Bechor. You have to render the one who was conceived first the Bechor. And how? One second. How does the Torah tell us this? Because it says, Kihu Reishis Oinoi. What does Reishis Oinoi mean? The first of his strength. Well, this passage, this phrase appears one other time in the Torah where Yaakov gives the bracha to Ruvain, where he says Reishis Oini, and Rashi says over there that it means that the first drop of semen that ever emerged from Yaakov was in the act of creating and the conception of Ruvain. So that's what it means here. Kihu Reishis Oini, that the Bechor does not belong to the double inheritance, does not belong to the child who was born first, but rather to the one who was conceived first. And this is beautiful. Everything in the pasuk fits nicely, etc. Now I see we have everyone raising their hands with questions. Let's go in order. Yes.
Can you reword the second question? What was the second question?
Second question.
What makes him think that?
Why does he think he has the right to render the second son the Bechor? The answer is because he was born first. Yes.
How is it possible for someone who's born, for someone to be born second or after a person that's been conceived?
Premature.
Well, that's what he's saying. He married the first woman, he divorced her, married a second woman, and the first child, the second wife, gives birth first to a premature baby, and right, and he said the way he says it is the 7 months and the 9 months, which
so you're assuming that the conceived one is going to have a regular birth.
Yeah, that's what he says. That's the story that happened. Now,
He did.
hey, does that address your question?
Yeah, well, I just didn't know how it was determined who was conceived first.
Right.
When you gave
Well, he's saying he married and divorced, and then yeah, Akiva.
2 things. One is they didn't wait the 3 months.
That's the 3 months is for her, not for him. He doesn't have to wait 3 months.
Good point. Okay, and then the other one is regarding the likely in this scenario it wasn't a premature birth. It was just they weren't married yet. It's hard to know in this situation you gave.
You don't know that the one.
We're not here as detectives. We're here to learn the halacha. We have to take it at face value. Now, okay, this story, this sefer, which like I said, was printed by the Vilna Gaon's son in the year 1877, was reprinted in just short of 20 years later, in the year 1894. By an individual by the name of Reb Shmuel Yevnen. Now, Reb Shmuel Yevnen was from the city of, it's usually printed here as Harodna, which is the same as Gerodna. The Ge and the He are interchangeable in that accent. Grodno was in Belarus, was a major Jewish city. It's about 200 kilometers from Vilna, so they're connected. You'll see actually one of these farms that I came across today in this, not this Sefer, different Sefer, is printed in the print house of Vilna and Gerodna.
Really?
So
In Lithuania?
yeah.
It's nowhere near Belarus.
Lithuania and Belarus border each other, and the two cities of Gerodna and Vilna are about 200 kilometers from each other.
They're neighbors.
So they're not next door villages, but they're not across the world. So this Reb Shmuel Yevnen was actually the son of a very famous Rabbi Avraham Yonah Yevnen, who was a Rav in Gerodna, Gerodna, how you want to pronounce it. And so he publishes this book 20 years later with his own sort of commentaries or notes on it. And then at the very last page of the book, so in the edition I'm using here, it's on page 48, he says that concerning this vart about the conception and the thing. So the truth is that this is a difficult story to accept because this goes against the halacha that the firstborn child is the Bechor. Is what Akiva mentioned yesterday. We'll get into more detail later. And he goes on to say a bit of a different version of the story where he says that he heard this. That Yoldu, this is interesting. He says that when the Torah says that the loved wife gave birth first, it doesn't mean giving birth. The word Yoldu doesn't mean giving birth. It means conceived. Now he doesn't say this, but I was racking my brains to remember where I saw this, and I remember now it's a Rashi in Parshas Bereshis, where in chapter 4, verse 19, where Rashi says that the word leida hoilid, when you talk about hoilid for a man, it could mean that he made his wife conceive. So perhaps this version is based on this. Anyway, he has a bit of a different version of the story, which comes out that indeed it's the other way around. That the child who was born first was also that the one who was born first remains the Bechor, and he sort of addresses the different questions in the story. I could go through his version of the story if we have to soon. But the point that I want to emphasize over here is that he introduces it by saying that I heard this from my friend Reb Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna. Reb Shlomo of Vilna is a very famous Paisuk and Mechaber, and he writes that he heard it, I believe, in the lifetime of the Gro, something like that. Okay, I thought it said here that he heard it in his lifetime. Oh yeah, no, he does. That this vart was already heard in the lifetime of the Gra. We have record of this vart being said. Now, why is that so important? Because many authors over the years have challenged this story to the extent that if you open up the Netziv's commentary to Chumash and Hamikdavar, he says, and somehow my computer is slowing down over here. One second.
It's the Yetzer Hara.
It definitely is the Yetzer Hara.
Your computer has the Yetzer Hara.
It's saying that the disk is not connected. Okay, let's try it again. Here we go. So, in the Netziv's Pirush on the Chumash, he writes like this. Why does the Torah say ha'achas ahuva v'ha'achas anoah? He has two wives. The one is loved and the one is hated. Says the Netziv, based on some things that he's written elsewhere, that it means to say that these are not that he simultaneously has two wives, which would be permissible in the Torah, but rather it means that he had one wife, divorced her, and then he had another wife, and that's why it says the one that's loved and the one that's hated. But then he says, hold on a second, why does the Torah go out of its way to tell it to me this way? So he says, because manach geminu was was sagt wenn er klappe dich zu kure ist seine ist jetzt mit kirche weil soll gedai doch dem war da mit geleden mit geleden sondern sie von getan müssen damit geleden ist sein. You might have thought, like this story from the Gra, you might have thought that if they're married, if you married one, divorced her, married a second one, and the child that's born last was conceived first, you should make that one the Bechor, like this story in the Shema, the name of the Gra reported. Says the Netziv, the Torah specifically coming to tell you, no, that's not true. He married the first one and she was alone, and therefore we're going to assume that she did conceive first, and then and nevertheless, we do not allow the second wife, the child, to be considered the Bechor. He's considering the second wife, he's doing it the other way around. He's understanding that the second wife is the Saniya, and she's married. I'm sorry, not that he's saying no. He's saying not that he married one, divorced, then the other. He's saying that he married one, she conceived, and then he married the other one. not without divorcing the first one. And B'meila, the second wife is hated because the first wife is making him hate her because she's infringing on her territory, like I was your only wife and now you brought in this other woman. And nevertheless, the other one, the Bechor of the hated one is the first, even though, because he was born first, even though the other one might have been conceived first. And then he says it's indeed true that in the name of the Gra it's reported the other way around. However, I do not believe this story in the name of the Gra, and it is false. It is a lie that was reported in his name. So the Netziv, he rejects, he doesn't even believe. He says whoever wrote this in the name of the Gra is lying. Which I don't know, one second, I don't know where the Netziv heard the story. To me it's a little bit strange to think that the Vilna Gaon's son himself would have written something that was a lie, and that's why I thought it's important to note what this Rabbi Shmuel Yevnin wrote, which even though he has a different version of the story, whatever it is, but the point is he's testifying that this was a rumor or a story that was already being circulated within the lifetime of the Gra. So it's difficult to accept that it's just a made-up story. So the bottom line is, but on the other hand, so the bottom line is like this. On the one hand, we have this story, which is like a beautiful vart, and it fits nicely with the psukim, and everything is nice. On the other hand, many authors have challenged it. The Shoel HaMeshiv, just one other prominent example, the Shoel HaMeshiv, Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natunzon, who was the very famous Pesach and Rav in the city of Lemberg, he passed away in 1875, and in his sefer he also quotes this. Just briefly, he doesn't get into a lot of details, and he says, no, this doesn't make any sense. The halacha is always that the one who was born first is considered the firstborn, not the one who was conceived first. Now, so on the one hand, we have this beautiful story from the Gra, which seems to be reliable. It's reported to have been said in his own lifetime. His own son publishes the story. And on the other hand, we have all these poskim who are saying, no, this is against halacha, this doesn't make any sense. How are we going to justify these? Now, just for some more history, there was a halachic journal that used to come out by the name of Tzefunos. Now, in the third volume of Tzefunos, there's a short one-page note, article, whatever, from Rabbi Shlomo Fisher. Rabbi Shlomo Fisher, we've spoken about him before. He was the author of Beis Yishai, a very prominent genius scholar in Israel. He passed away recently, I would want to guess about 3 years ago, give or take. And in this journal, which is published, volume 3, I believe, is from Tafshin Mem Tes, 1989, he has here a 5-part list with the title Al Tishkin Ba'alecha Avla. Do not allow, it's paraphrased in the Gemara, Al Tishkin Ba'alecha Avla is a prohibition against having a Sefer She'einu Muga, an unedited Sefer Torah in your house. And he's going to point out to you here 5 different recently published books that Rabbi Fisher is saying these are not reliable books and they should be removed from your possession. And in number 3, he says there is a new edition of Aderes Eliyahu, a commentary from the Vilna Gaon on the Chumash, and the publisher of this new version inserted in the beginning of Parshas Kisei say this story, and he says, "V'hu pirush shel hevel v'sichlus v'toos badin." This is a story of nonsense and stupidity and a mistake in halacha. Numerous great authors have already screamed about it. It is a mitzvah to erase this section from the book Aderes Eliyahu. So that's printed in Tzefunos number 3. 2 journals later, in Tzefunos number 5, which is published in honor of Tishrei Tov Shin Nun, Tishrei 1989, we have a response to this article from Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Stern, who's a name that I recognize, but from Bnei Brak, probably some important Pesach of contemporary, but I can't place the name of his sefer right now. And another follow-up article where they come to the defense of this story from the Gra, which we're going to get to in a minute. However, before we get to that, I want to show you the Klei Chemda. So, the Klei Chemda, does anybody have any questions before we move on?
I mean, how would you even go by who conceived first? Imagine the regular guy has 5 wives.
Let's.
How would you do it? How would you even?
Why do we have to make ourselves a problem coming up with a scenario that we don't know? Here we have a scenario that we do know. So what's the halacha in this case? So the report.
No, there's no way that you could judge.
In this case, there is a way. In this case, we know.
Right. But I'm saying Torah would never give you halacha that you can never.
That's what the Gra is saying. The Gra is saying that the Torah words it in such a way specifically to address this case. That the way the story is reported is that this was the Gra's chiddush, that this funny story, which is unusual, is addressed by this specific wording of the Gra.
So
I think the strongest kasha on this whole thing is what you asked yesterday. That we see from, we're going to get, and this is exactly what I'm going to go to right now, is that we see from the story of Yaakov and Esav that this story, that this is wrong. So let me open up the Klei Chemda. The Klei Chemda addresses this in two places. The Klei Chemda, his name is Rabbi Palotsky, what's his first name? Meir Don Palotsky. He is born in 1866, passes in 1928. He's buried in a tremendous Talmud Chacham and Goyen. By the way, his Sefer Klei Chemda is quoted probably dozens, if not hundreds of times in the Kutei Sichos. And he passes away, according to his Wikipedia page, on Vav Nisan, 1928. He's 62 years old. He's buried in a huge turnout on his funeral in Warsaw. And one of the maspidim they bring here was Rabbi Menachem Zemba, of fame for the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and maybe also of fame in Chabad for having attended the Rebbe's wedding. And and one quote from his hesped is, he says like this: if a Rebbe passes away and he has children, so then you say one Rebbe passes away and now you have new Rebbes because the children become Rebbes. But when a Goyen of the stature of Rabbi Meir Don Palotsky passes away, there is no there are no other Goinim who can come and fill his role. Okay, so Rabbi Meir Don Palotsky, the Klei Chemda, is a true genius, and he addresses this story and this question in two places. It's both in his commentary to Parshas Toldos and in his commentary to Parshas Kiseitze. And he says two different things. In Toldos he's going with Londis, and in Kiseitze he's going with science. It's absolutely fascinating. I love it. We're going to get to Kiseitze in a minute, but let's start with what he writes in Parshas Toldos. So, and I should say that what he says goes on for quite a number of pages. We're not going to go through everything he says, but I am going to hopefully present at least a snippet which is enough to get an appreciation for where he's going with all of this. So he quotes the story that we said with the Gra, etc. And then he says like this: the world, the people asked, the world asked, that Rashi says in our pasuk, "Va'achagach yotza achiv." So Esav is born, and then Yaakov is born holding on to the heel of Esav. Why is Yaakov holding on to the heel of Esav? Says Rashi, quoted by Rabbi Akiva yesterday, that the Medrash writes that that Yaakov had the right to stop Esav from going out first. Because Yaakov was created first. He was conceived first. And therefore he wanted to be first and to be born. And then he should be able to take. In other words, later on in their life, we have this whole thing between Yaakov and Esav, with Yaakov purchasing the Bechorah from Esav. But here Yaakov was holding on to Esav to try and block him so he could get out first, because the Bechorah rightfully belongs to him because he was conceived first. And like Rashi brings, mashal mishvei feres, that if you have a tube and you insert and you insert two stones and then you empty it out, so the stone that you insert first is going to come out last. So too we're imagining sort of the uterus as the first Yaakov being conceived and getting into the uterus, followed by Esav. So really Yaakov should have come out first, and that's why he's blocking Yaakov from coming out. Now, what do we see from here? That Yaakov wanted to be the firstborn because he was conceived first, but he wasn't going to be the firstborn because Esav was born first. According to the Gra, if we know that Yaakov was conceived first, then he should be the firstborn. What's he care if Esav be born first, and he's still going to be the firstborn because we know that he was conceived first, right? And yet we know that when twins are born, the oldest twin is the oldest. We don't consider the younger twin to be the oldest.
You could answer that question.
Right.
Well, you want to go into science?
No. You could say when you don't know. When you really
but the assumption, the basis for this medrash is, again, you could say, we'll get. I told you, we're going to get to the science with his next shtickle. But right now we're talking about we're talking, according to this Rashi, according to this Medrash, the understanding is that whenever you have twins, the one that is born second is conceived first. So if we accept that premise, then according to the Gra, the second twin should have the din of the Bechira, and that's not the case. Open up any Gemara, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. There's no mention that if the oldest children are twins, that the second twin is considered the Bechira. The first born child is the Bechira.
Oh, because you're saying because you
They're
couldn't know.
conceived at
You're
the
saying
same
because with
time.
twins you do know based
Right.
on the
Exactly.
order
If you accept this
This-
metaphor of the tube with the two stones,
Right.
then the assumption is that whenever you have twins, the one who was born second was conceived
Let's
first.
assume
It's only
that's
true
let's
of-
assume that's the science. If
only
that's
Right,
true
we're
of-
accepting that
You
as
actually
science
do
again.
know.
That's
He
I
gets
was
into
gonna-
the. We're going to
that's
get into
only
the
true
science
for
later.
fraternal
Huh?
twins.
One second. I told you we're getting into
Not
science
not
later.
real science. We're talking about.
We're not getting into the science now. We're going to talk science later. Right now, we're just accepting Rashi at face value. Okay? Says the Klechamda like this.
Going to the paradigm.
Okay, so he gets into. So I'm going to skip this piece. Then he goes like this. He says that I don't understand. What's Bichlal the question on the Gra? The Gra is talking about one thing. Rashi is talking about another thing. Rashi is talking about which of the two firstborns, which of the two children, which of the twins has the sanctity of the Bechira, which one is going to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, etc. Concerning that, it depends on Peter Rechem, who is the first to emerge from the womb. Peter Rechem, emerging from the womb.
That's all Rashi's talking about.
Yeah, why does
Rashi's
Yaakov...
not talking about inheritance. Also.
Yeah, well, that's what he says. Why does he... I mean, in the discussion between Yaakov and Esav selling the Bechira, Rashi says that it has to do with avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. So it seems that that's the context. So if that's the context, says the Klechamda, I don't understand. What's the connection? You have two things. There's the Bechor, which Bechor is more holy, and that's determined by which one emerged first from the mother's womb, Peter Rechem. And then there's which of the two gets a double inheritance, and that's determined by which one emerged first from the father, which is Reishis Oinah, who's the first sperm, the first one to be conceived. So it's two different things. The Bechor is talking, the Vilna Gaon is talking about which one gets a double inheritance, and that's determined by who's the father, by which one emerges first from the father, so to speak, during conception. And the Rashi with Yaakov and Esav is talking about which one is considered more sacred, and that is determined by which one is born first, which one emerges from the mother first. What's the stira?
Which one is designated for this particular position?
I don't understand.
And then he says, hold on, but if that's the case, you don't understand, Rick?
I don't understand. You can't tell which sperm.
We have to accept the premise. Rashi says that we can tell. So you have a question on Rashi. Fine, that's a good question. But right now we're discussing Rashi, so we need to accept Rashi's premise.
Rashi's understanding of the biology or the physics there is that not physics,
But
the
from a practice,
physiology.
But the
or-
practical
physics.
standpoint is someone is born
So if
first.
you would
That's
take that
irrelevant to our
assumption,
discussion.
Let's assume that Rashi, let's assume he's right. That's what Rashi.
Right. I understand.
This is what Rashi thought because of based on his understanding.
Right. I understand.
So you do know which one, and then
Yeah.
he's saying it goes by birth, not conception.
Right. In both cases, whether it's being holy or whether it's the inheritance.
Well, all Rashi is talking about, according to who we
The Klechamda.
according to the Klichemda, if you look at all the locations where we're talking about the dispute between the Yaakov and Esav, it's really about designation as Bechor in terms of special tasks of
Says the Klechamda,
and so forth.
hold on. So basically, the Klechamda says, okay, everything is okay. In Parshas Kisei, we're talking about who gets a double portion. That depends on who emerges from which sperm creates it first. And here we're talking about the birth. But he says, hold on a second. If that's the case, why does Rashi say Minadin Hoyima Akfei? Rashi says that Yaakov had the right to withhold Esav. What are you talking about? He has the right. That is the Teva Abriya. The way the nature works, right, is that whoever was conceived first is born second. And Hashem says that whoever is born first receives the sanctity of the Bechira. So what does it mean that Yaakov had the right to do so? Says the Klichemda, I'll tell you, that everything is going to fit perfectly, and we're going to uphold the opinion of the Gra and the Shulchan Aruch. Everything's going to fit beautifully. He says, why is it that why should there be this difference that Bechor of inheritance depends on who comes from the father first and Bechor. Right, so it's like this. The Gemara says by Esther.
You just said, why is it that what?
Why is it that the Bechor of who's more sacred it depends on who's born first, and the Bechor on who's and gets a double inheritance goes on who's conceived first. So he says, the Gemara says in Megillah concerning Esther, it says in the Megillah that she didn't have a father or mother, and when her father or mother died, Mordechai adopted her. So why does it say this double expression? So the Gemara says that her father died as soon as she was conceived, so that he wasn't her father even for a moment, and her mother died as soon as she was born, so she wasn't her mother even for a moment. She didn't even for one moment have a mother or a father. So you see from here, and he quotes the Maharal in his Sefer Or Chodosh on the Megillah Esther, that a father is called a father from the moment of conception. As soon as the wife is conceived, the father is considered the father of the child. And therefore, if we want to say that Esther didn't have a father even for one moment, we have to say that Esther's father died the moment she was conceived. Right? Whereas a mother is not considered a mother until she gives birth. During her pregnancy, she's not considered the mother.
Right.
And then the fetus is considered Yerech, just considered to be part of her. The child is only considered a separate entity after the child is born. That's when she becomes the mother. Says the Klechem. Now, but why? Why should this be the case? Why is there a difference between the father and the mother? So he says like this. A yid, we know this gets into the whole abortion question. A goy is put to death for killing a fetus. Chayiv misa. A yid is not put to death for killing a fetus, and there's no explicit prohibition anywhere. It doesn't say anywhere in the Gemara explicitly if it's forbidden to kill for a Jew to kill a fetus. So this gets into the whole question and the different shittas of abortion. We're not going to get into the whole big topic right now. But there he says there is one opinion which he quotes here in the name of the Chechan of Agoin that there is a prohibition of hashchasa zera. There's a prohibition against wasting seed. So at the very least, killing a fetus is no worse off, is at least as bad as wasting seed. So if you're not allowed to waste seed, you're not allowed to kill a fetus. However, who does this apply to? Only a man is not allowed to waste seed. A woman is allowed to waste seed. Meaning, if for example, in practice, if a woman, after a man and a woman have been intimate, the woman is allowed to go and wash herself out so that she shouldn't be able to conceive. And in fact, halachically, this is a major difference when you talk about birth control, that it's much more straightforward halachically for the woman to take steps to birth control than for the man, in part for this reason. So it turns out, says the Klei Chemda, that if you take this argument against abortion, then this would only apply to a man, and a woman would be allowed to abort. So that's why, because the woman is allowed to abort, so in other words, we're saying it's not really an entity as far as she's concerned, so that's why she's not called the mother until the child is born. Whereas the father, who does have the prohibition of wasting seed, so he's not allowed to abort, so b'meila, the father, that's why the father is considered the father as soon as there's conception. No, so he says if you take this all a step further, this only applies to Yidden, but to Goyim, who are put to death for abortion, so that would mean that the mother is considered a mother right away. So let's see again what he's saying over here. So therefore the mother can be considered the mother as soon as she conceived, and therefore so he says, therefore, the Kedushas Bechira applies from they were conceived. In other words, he's saying like this. The reason why Kedushas Bechira, sanctity of a Bechira, depends on who is born first is because it's the Peter Rechem. The mother is not considered the mother until they're born. But that's only when you're talking about a Yid. Here, we're talking about before Matan Torah. So Yaakov has the same category as a Ben Noach. If that's the case, the mother is considered the mother already by conception, and that's why Rashi says that in the case of Yaakov and Esav, Yaakov had the right to the firstborn because he was conceived first. That's the way the Torah made it, that whoever was conceived first is born second. Yeah, but that only plays a role after Matan Torah. But before Matan Torah, the one who was conceived first should be the Bechor, because she's already considered the mother at the moment of conception. So that's why Yaakov had the right to be the Bechor. Okay.
Because motherhood after Matan Torah is after birth because of all of the halachos of Peter Rechem.
Right.
Peter Rechem doesn't exist yet. So
Correct.
now there is no right. So now it all goes back to conception.
Right.
But the divine Shekinah only rests on the mother.
Anyway, then he goes on with a whole long pilpul about whether they had the din of Yidden or din of Goyim. We'll stop it there. So basically, what's the Klichemda saying? The Klichemda is saying that we can justify everything that the Gra says and the Halacha and the story, everything fits perfectly. Because the Gra is saying that post Matan Torah, the firstbornhood goes to the one who was conceived first. And that's only as far as the inheritance is concerned. But as far as the sanctity of the firstborn, it goes to the one who was born first. And the reason is because the inheritance is from the father. The father is considered the father from the moment of conception. So whoever was conceived first is the firstborn. Whereas the Bechorah goes to the one who was born first, because that's determined by Peter Rechem. Right? But that's all post Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, both the sanctity and the inheritance were determined by the moment of conception, and that's why Yaakov is saying to Esav that he has the right to the Bechorah, and that's why he wants to be born first, because in those days everything depended on conception, and so everything fits beautifully. It's all nice, very creative.
How did they determine?
Now, this is all what
There's no
No,
OBGYN.
Rashi tells us.
the whole thing that you and I take for granted, that you should be able to determine something based on scientific tests, is a modern thing. Like once upon a time, nobody.
Well, no, I mean in the context of time, how would one determine?
Okay, that's the Klichemda in Parshas
No, you know
Bereshit.
it by who was born first. That's how you know it.
You're assuming that the one who was born first was conceived.
The opposite.
So
Is
I'm
the
saying,
Gra
how-
and Mahara the
well,
same
my
person?
point is,
No, not at
how
all.
do you then automatically
Vilna
assume
Gaon?
that?
Yeah, the Maharal is
Because the
You don't-
way,
the Maharal
just like a
is Rabbi
tube,
Yehuda
if you
Leib
put
and
two
Bezalel,
drops
the
in,
Maharal of
comes
Prague.
this
But
way,
you don't know if
one
the
goes
one-
up the tube this way, and the other one, who's going to be born
Were they
first?
contemporaries?
The second one.
All right, no,
just
not at all.
logic.
Maharal is much earlier.
Much what?
Much earlier.
There's no room to go.
You
Okay.
could be conceived and be born 10 months later or 8 months later.
Either way, there's you have a tube.
Right.
One goes up to the top, the other one comes afterwards. This one's got to have to be born first.
No cutting of line.
But
There's no cutting in the way. The other one's in the way.
There's actually two fallopian.
That's the science.
There's
It's not,
two-
it's not a
it's
test
not.
tube. It's like a jar.
It's like
That's
this.
not modern science.
There's a
but
uterus
that's
and there's two
that's the way it
It's a
works
cake.
Eggs
Kalim.
come from the
in that
fallopian.
story.
Okay, this is what I've told you now is Klichemda in Parshas Chodesh, and he summarizes it himself in his commentary to Parshas Kiseitze by saying, this is the Gra, this is the question, and if you look in what I wrote and told us, I answered everything b'derech hapilpul, through the Klichemda, through a
The
pilpul.
pilpul we just heard.
Right, exactly. And then he says, Omar shanira ikke be'ir inyan zeh. However, I think that's the pilpul. The pilpul's a nice pilpul, but this is the true answer to the whole topic. It says like this. He says, the Gemara says in Nidam that twins. Okay, now you already mentioned it, so I'm just going to sort of
I have
address the elephant. I'm going to address the elephant in the room, right? You and I know that there's something called identical twins
Right.
and fraternal twins,
Right.
right? Let's imagine we don't know that, because the understanding of that concept and certainly the widespread knowledge of that concept is something very modern. I don't think 100 and certainly 200 years ago anybody knew that, and if maybe there were some doctors who knew that, certainly your average guy on the street didn't understand or know that there was a difference between identical and fraternal twins. So,
There's no way
Okay.
without modern science they could have seen that there are 2 eggs or 1 egg.
okay, so don't ask me
They
questions.
understand genetics.
And so here's what it
Very
says.
modern.
The Gemara says like this.
So two separate genders then.
Yeah, well, not necessarily.
And some
Can't have identical
they're siblings,
twins.
sometimes, and sometimes they look more alike, sometimes.
No,
It's not like you can have fraternal boys.
obviously everybody knew that sometimes twins looked.
Female, you know, it's two separate.
No, but Emmanuel, obviously everybody knew that sometimes twins look more similar than others, but the understanding that a twin could be either two separate eggs fertilizing or one egg that fertilizes then split into two, and that if it happens this way, they must both be the same gender, and if it happens the other way, it's possible for them to be different genders. That's all very modern knowledge.
They thought every twin was two sets of sperm.
Or two rocks and one tube.
Well, it is two
embryos.
sperm. The question
Two
is if it's two.
embryos.
Oh no.
No,
It's
that's
two-
what they
yeah.
assumed, and they said sometimes they really look alike.
Okay.
Like that kind of thing.
But, yeah.
Sometimes
So let's see-
so.
so
And
let's-
sometimes they're even
Yeah,
two
You
genders.
could have identical twins have two genders.
Now,
Yeah, right.
now what about?
Totally possible.
Now hold on. Now, what makes identical twins identical? You know, I read.
Zygote splits.
You know, you could even have. I don't know because I'm not the scientist, but you could even have identical twins who look different. In other words, the fact that they're when in our minds identical means they look alike, but they could be scientifically identical, but they could still look different, right? I mean,
They could have the same genetic code, and then because of
Socially.
because of different circumstances that happen throughout their life, or even while they're
In
That's
utero.
in utero, they could
It's-
make some
Okay, so he says that-
substantive changes.
he says like this. The Gemara says in Niddo Daf Chav Zayin that twins are created from one tipa, from one drop of sperm. In Cain, he says, if that's the case, the whole question over here doesn't pertain to twins. The Vilna Gaon is talking about a case where you have two separate, two women
Right.
doing this everything. You're asking me a question from Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov and Esav are created from one drop. So you can't give it. So how could Rashi Bichlal talk about you have a tube with one going in first and one in second? They're created from one drop. It doesn't make any sense. However, what does Rashi mean by his whole analogy of the tube and the stones? What Rashi means to say is that in this case, Yaakov and Esav weren't really twins. Now, what he's saying weren't really twins, I'm going to translate that into our language. What he's saying is they were fraternal twins, not identical twins. Right? In other
How
words,
does he know that it was there?
one second, let him talk. That's why in Parasha concerning Yaakov and Esav, it says Toimim, the word twins is spelled with a letter missing without an aleph, to teach me she'echad tzaddik ve'echad rasha, that one is a tzaddik and one is a rasha. How could it be that one is a tzaddik and one is a rasha? Twins are supposed to be identical. The answer is they weren't really twins, they were fraternal twins. They weren't from the same drop. They were from two different drops. Right? The Malach brings the drop before Hashem, and it says, "Is this going to be a tzaddik?" Right? In other words, he's saying twins, true twins, what we call in our language identical twins. They come from one drop, and if they come one drop, they're going to be identical, and they're going to both be a tzaddik or both be a rasha. As we find, he says, for example, by Peretz and Zorach, which are the children of Yehuda born from Tamar, where there it says Toimim with an aleph, and they were made from one drop, and they were both tzaddikim, and that's why over there the older one is a b'chayr. Then he gets into a whole long thing about Peretz and Zorach, which I'm not going to get into right now. Right? But here, Yaakov and Esav was one is a tzaddik, one is a rasha. Says Rashi, if that's the case, that means they're not real twins. They're pretend twins, or in our language, let's call it, they're fraternal twins. They're fraternal twins, that means they're created from two different drops. If they're created from two different drops, then the one that goes in first comes out second, and b'meila, everything makes sense. In other words, the gra is so it matches with the gra. The gra's whole point is that who was conceived first is the b'chor. That's what Yaakov is saying.
That's what we're saying by Yaakov, or Rashi saying.
That's why. Yeah.
So in other words, yes, it's true that usually the firstborn b'chor, the firstborn twin is going to be the b'chor. But that's because usually twins are created from one drop. Usually, let's say in our language, usually twins are identical.
Which is
And b'meila, they're created from one drop. So the male of the firstborn twin is the Bechor. If that's the case, why does Yaakov say that he should get it? Because Yaakov and Esav were the exception to the rule. The rule is what Chazal say, that twins are that twins are identical. So we're saying fraternal twins are the exception to the rule. And then in the exception to the rule, says Yaakov, in line with the Gra, I should get it because I'm created first.
And that's the
I
exact
see.
opposite. Identical twins are a coincidence of nature. Fraternal twins are a function of anatomy, biology.
Agbanim, this is what it says in the Gemara.
Oh, I know.
The Gemara says that twins are born from one drop, and that's what it says in the Gemara. What the Kli Chemda is assuming, which it doesn't say in the Gemara, is number one, that fraternal twins is even a possibility, but he's saying that it's an exception to the rule. And number two, he's saying that because Yaakov and Esav, he's learning this pshat in Rashi, that he's saying what Rashi is telling us here is that because Yaakov and Esav was one as a tzaddik, one as a rasha, that means that they were not identical, that they were the fraternal, that they were the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Okay, again.
Therefore, there's one that's conceived first.
Right,
And one
there's
that's
two different sperm. And one of the sperm was a Russian. One.
Right, and then therefore the one that's conceived first has
Anyway,
special rights.
he goes on and on.
But
Identify the embryo as separate versus the
Right,
sperm being
it's a
separate.
separate sperm and separate.
No, an embryo makes much more. The sperm cells come from the same.
what question was he asking? Was he answering?
For a fraternal twin, that's correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it would be more like to say the ones that South Russia would say to define the embryo as being separate versus.
Right, but the embryo comes from one egg and one sperm, so.
Anyway, he goes on and on. We're going to leave it right here for now. What?
But he's saying the Vilna.
He's saying the Vilna Gaon is right, that who was conceived first is the Bechor. If that's the case, why is the halacha that when you have twins, the one who was born first is the Bechor? Because we're going to assume that they're identical twins. Because most twins are identical. Yaakov and
they're
Esav
conceived at the same time.
You're right.
So we're going to have to go by birth.
Exactly.
As opposed to what happened with Yaakov and Esav, where so then it's a fight to the whoever gets out first, basically.
No, then in theory. In practice, in other words, like this. In practice, we're going to consider whoever was born first the Bechor because we have to assume that whoever was born first was conceived first, or that were conceived at the same time. But this case was the exception, and that's why Yaakov is trying to plead his case. No, we're not regular twins. We're fraternal twins, so I better get out first, because otherwise they're not going to realize that I was conceived first, that we're the mashal of the two stones into the tube.
But it's possible that fraternal twins can be conceived at the same time. But it must be the case that identical twins are conceived at the same time, because it's only one egg that then splits.
Yeah, right. But that's
why is it
but
that
the point
he has
is,
to argue his case and buy the Yaakov has to buy it from Esav? If we know that once it's happening in Russia, then he doesn't have to buy it. It's be'emes the Bechor.
Because he lost. He lost the argument.
Because it's a matter of who's conceived first, right?
So exactly. So why doesn't he have to buy it off Esav?
No.
he's saying it really is. The point is that really it is about conception.
Correct.
It just happens to be that that 99.99% of the time they're conceived at the same time. So now we
So
can't
why
go by
does it
conception. We
deny
have to go by birth. But really, it should be conception. If it's really right, so then you have a good point.
What's
Then it
his
should well.
Well, how do you
He's
what-
saying, why did Yaakov have to buy?
Why does
the
Yaakov have to
Bechor?
buy anything, right? Why does he have to? There's no. He really was conceived first.
This happened before
Why
Rashi.
does he have to buy any Bechor?
First of
And in
all,
that case, he was conceived first. He should have all the rights, and it
Because
shouldn't
no-
even,
well,
shouldn't even be an argument.
first of all, Rashi's not talking about the sale of the Bechor. Rashi's talking to at birth, where he's holding on to his leg and trying to get out
Right, but
first.
based
How
on
does
what
it-
he's saying here, that we know that the two
Because he
separate,
failed.
It goes after conception. The kedushas of Bechor or whatever it is.
Yeah,
It must
because
be- it must-
how is
Why is
Yaakov
it-
going to convince everybody that he was conceived
The
first?
person was conceived
Right.
first.
It must be
is
that.
second.
It must be that
Because
this
we
is
have this
something-
mashal of the two stones in the tube.
No, but maybe
Your problem is that the mashal doesn't match scientifically.
No,
so stop thinking. You have to stop thinking about
It's not
science so
scientific,
much.
it's logic. I'm just saying,
Okay,
why is it that
what do you mean it's logic? The tube thing is
Yeah.
the tube
perfectly
thing is very
logical.
logical.
As long as you think of it in terms of a tube.
Get a tube and two rocks. I'll show you.
Yes,
You'll see,
but
I'll
the
show you.
tube is
We'll mark the
wider
rocks.
than one stone, is my point. The
Well,
tube-
mark the rocks. I bet you the second one's going to come out first. I will bet you.
Why
If you
not?
have a wide enough tube, then you don't know.
So you're saying that but based on your conception of the width of a uterus and the
Yes.
size of right. So your conception of the width of the uterus is modern science.
Well-
they didn't know that.
They had tube-like uteruses back then. But it looks like what really was happening with Yaakov, according to this Hope shot, is that Yaakov is contending with this whole thing. I mean, he's constantly trying to prove that conception is the main thing. He said, like, I know my brother was born first. You guys don't understand. So
Right.
that's why he's constantly buying and bargaining. And
Something like that.
It's just an eternal struggle for Yaakov. And really, he had that right that whole time.
Okay, now I want to get back to Tzfunas number 5. So Tzfunas number 5, he says that Shlomo Fisher said that you have to delete this thing from your books. He says, however,
Dude,
what's also
that's what a uterus
David,
is. Seriously.
I'm glad he didn't show me anything else.
This is a uterus. The conception
Can you-
takes place at the ovaries.
Do you have an ancient
There's
uterus?
two of them.
I want to see.
Do you have a picture of a tube and two rocks?
I want to see an ancient.
No, a tube.
One of the
Not a
uteruses
uterus.
of one of the matriarchs. Otherwise,
The
I'm not
uterus,
interested.
the conception takes place on the ovaries, not in.
But
in
what
the
this is what
uterus. No,
we're trying
the
to
baby
explain.
is.
When you're
so I found that whole thing fascinating. So both the pilpul and the science and everything together is beautiful. But here's another literary twist, which I find fascinating. So we saw that Shlomo Fisher, who's a goyin, and it's interesting to me that he, that you have somebody the likes of the Klei Chemda who's saying that he's validating the story, but Shlomo Fisher is so convinced that the story is false that he's saying that you have to erase it from your things. So here we have somebody writing back, two people writing back in Tzfunas number 5 to Reb Shlomo Fisher. So the
to
second
this
person,
magazine in 1989.
yeah. So the second person, Rabbi Aaron Yaakov Cohen, is he writes that if you look, like I started quoting before, if you look in Saras Eliyahu in the last page in that appendix, you'll see that he has a different version of the story, but that also doesn't help, and it's still no good. And he's on team Rabbi Fisher that we have to delete this story. However, we have here Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Stern. Let me just quickly Google that. I'm pretty sure we're going to come up with something. Shmuel Eliezer Stern. There we go. I knew I could find this. Shmuel Eliezer Stern. What did I say, Eliyahu? Shmuel Eliezer Stern. Sorry, right? Was born in 1948 as a dayan and posek in Bnei Brak. Oh, that's it. I knew he is one of the primary students of Rabbi Shmuel Vosner. I've definitely seen and come across him before, because he has a number of Svarim published. Okay. So, it says Rabbi Stern that nowadays we have not suddenly, but over the last couple centuries, even more and more, we have access to ancient writings of Rishonim, Balei HaTosfos, primarily French Tosafists, who we did not have access to before. And he says that if you look at a number of these different sources, and he quotes here the commentary of Rabbi Yaakov of Vienna on the Torah, I'm not sure who Rabbi Yaakov of Vienna is. There's Rabbi Yitzchak Erzarua, is Rabbi Yitzchak of Vienna, so I don't know if this is Rabbi Yaakov Erzarua, maybe a son of his, I'm not sure who that is. And he quotes also the Moshe Skein and Balei HaTosfos, and then he quotes, and I actually looked this up, there is a very impressive sefer called Tosfos HaSholim, published by a certain Rabbi Gelis. I don't think he ever finished the whole set, and I don't believe he's alive anymore, but he basically went through every library under the sun, every manuscript possible, where you have Tosfos manuscripts, commentaries in the Torah, and he put in everything into this book. So, he also brings this. So they say, how could it be that Yaakov wants, this is a question that a lot of commentators ask, how could it be that Yaakov wanted to purchase the Bechorah, the firstborn from Esav, over there with the story of the lentil soup? Surely the halacha is that you cannot buy or sell something that is not yet materialized. So he wants to buy the double portion. That's a beferish halacha. The Gemara says that if a person sells his firstborn, right, the sale is not valid. So how does he want to sell it? So says, he brings here from Rabbi Yaakov Avina, and again you have different things, different commentaries. But basically he says that it's taka true that all Yaakov wanted to buy was the Shem HaBechira, the name that he should be known as the Bechir, because as far as the inheritance was concerned, he didn't need to buy it because it was already his, because he was conceived first, as we know, from the mashal of the two stones in the tube, right? So you see here that there were certain Rishonim who were saying that, that Yaakov was already the firstborn, and he was anyway going to receive the double in portion of inheritance, and whatever his deal was with Esav was something else. It couldn't have been to be buying the double portion of inheritance, because that's not up for sale anyway. You're not able to sell that right. It's not a sellable right, as the Gemara says, and therefore, so you see clearly that there are Rishonim who are saying the same thing that matches up with the Vilna Gaon, that the one who was conceived first is born first. And then he brings over here, Rabbi Stern brings, and I looked this up as well, that the Pirush Hatur al HaTorah. Now we may be more familiar with the Baal HaTurim, which is a shorter commentary, but the Torah also has a longer commentary on the Torah, and it's called usually the Pirush HaAruch of the Torah. And I looked this up, I have it on alhatorah.org, and he writes that on this pasuk, so it's in Bereshis chapter 25, verse 31, where he goes through this question of how could you sell something that's not even sellable. And he says, "Yesh metahartzim." There are those who answer, "Mishum sheYaakov hayroilius bechor," because Yaakov should have been the bechor because he was conceived from the first drop. But Esav, and therefore he's going to get that. That's why it's a valid sale, I guess, because he could have anyway. It was anyway his, I guess, is what he's saying. Says the Torah v'lo. However, this does not appear to be correct to me. The bechor peterechem tali milsa v'Esav peterechem hava, because bechor doesn't go by who was conceived first. It goes, like the Klei Chemda said, by the one who was born first out of the uterus. And so, essentially what Rabbi Stern is trying to say is that Rabbi Fisher is trying to delete this. However, the truth is that this machlokas, let's call it a machlokas between the Vilna Gaon, or one report of the Vilna Gaon, and the Shoel HaMeshiv and the Netziv, and all of those, essentially already finds itself reflected in machlokas in between the Baalei HaTosfos. So I always find that fascinating when you have a contemporary discussion, and then based on manuscripts, you're able to see that at least the roots of that discussion are on some level already apparent hundreds of years earlier. And with that, we close out. And Mi'at Hashem, next week we're going to talk about the David Oiri and the controversies involved with that.